right. I'm starting a little early today to make sure my tech is working all right. I've got my webcam working, which makes me feel good, getting that all straightened out. And I'm going to open a new tab in my browser to see if I can share what's going on my own page. So maybe. Okay. All right. Moving right along, getting there. There it is. Let's see if I can go ahead. If, as you guys are arriving, if you want to share a video or anything like that, that will be helpful for others to join in with us. So I'm going to do it right now. Oh, maybe. Right. There we go. Moving right along, getting there. All right, and I'm going to turn speakers down as I did last time and try not to make everything crash like I did last time. So, all right, it is 2 o'clock now, but we are going to wait a minute or two just to see if there's anyone else that is planning on joining us and is not quite here yet. Hello, Sam and Carol, watching us from Florida. I hope you're still enjoying some decently warm weather down there in the south. While we wait to see if there are a couple more folks that are joining us. Hey Mike, good to see you. Just wanted to remind you, if you are a part of our First Friends Church family, we made an announcement on Facebook yesterday via a video, and then also sent out an email to those of you that are on the email list for First Friends that we are doing something unique this year because of our unique circumstances. We're hoping to do a special Easter greeting during our digital service on Easter Sunday. So if you would like to greet our church family, you just need to follow the instructions on that page, and we're just asking you to record a 5-second video that says something like, Happy Easter from the Fowlers, with you and your family, whoever it is, and then upload it on our church website. The address is there on the post. So we would love to get some great involvement. You have about 1 week, and I know the temptation, because I share it, is to procrastinate and say, I'll get to it. But don't wait too long, because we don't want to have all of them flooding in at the last moment and crashing our servers. And that's the sound of my wife turning on the live broadcast in the room next to me. She's such a big fan. Hey Jay, what's going on? Oh, The Greatest Showman, right over, other hand, right over here. Yes, my daughter is doing piano lessons, and she chose to learn some of the songs from The Greatest Showman. Her and my wife very, very much enjoy that movie. So, yeah, I'm coming to you from the room at our house that is sort of a study, sort of a music room. And as for many of you, probably if you're parents of school-age children, it has become the schoolroom these days, where the kids do their homeworks and things like that. So, all right, well, we're far enough in now that we can go ahead and get started. Welcome to this devotional time. We are trying on Tuesdays at 2 o'clock to do something on Facebook Live, and then this will be available a little later on YouTube. Just ways to connect digitally. We're calling them our e-connections, and they are sort of ways to allow us to stay together and to be connected in this world of social distancing and stay-at-home policies and all sorts of things. So the first one was last week, and you can check that out if you want here on Facebook or on YouTube. And I introduced this book at the time. It is a book that is called What Did Jesus Ask? And I'm using this sort of as a springboard for these devotions because it is a book full of a collection of Christian writers who are taking questions that Jesus asked and unpacking them. And I love it because it's only like 3 or 4 pages of content. It's a great tool to use to sort of springboard into what are intended to be some short devotionals for us to share together. This is not intended to be an entire sermon. So if I start going close to 20, 25, 30 minutes, you can just go ahead and cut me off because that's way too much. So today we are going to be looking in this book, and if any of you happen to grab it, you're welcome to find it somewhere. There's a devotional. One of them is by Sarah Young, who is the author of the really popular devotional Jesus Calling, and she tackles a question in the book from Matthew chapter 8, and it's from the scene of Jesus calming the storm. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. The question within that story is this one: You of little faith, why are you so afraid? So let's read the whole passage in context. Matthew 8, starting in verse 23, going to verse 27, and you will hear that question in this passage. Then Jesus got into the boat with his disciples, and they followed him. And suddenly a furious storm came up on the lake, so that the waves swept over the boat. But Jesus was sleeping. The disciples went and woke him, saying, "Lord, save us! We're going to drown." And he replied, "You of little faith, why are you so afraid?" And then he got up and rebuked the wind and the waves, and it was completely calm. The men were amazed and asked, "What kind of man is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him." So when I was younger, probably around middle to late elementary school, I was absolutely terrified of storms, petrified of storms. I think it all started when in elementary school we watched a video, and back then that meant wheeling in the TV cart. For those of you who are of that generation, getting that monstrous metal TV cart with the huge tube TV on it and all those signs that say, "Don't let children push this or something terrible will happen." So wheel that into the room, and I remember watching this educational video, I guess it was supposed to be, on tornadoes. And from that day forward, I was absolutely terrified of storms. They showed a tornado that was able to take a little piece of straw and thrust it into a fence post, or take a 2x4 and push it most of the way through a huge tree. I saw that video, that educational video, and I was petrified. I remember being young and seeing that little W come up in the corner of the television screen, signifying that there's a weather warning. And as soon as that happened, my anxiety went through the roof. I went into a panic. Never mind the fact that that little W could represent a flash flood watch for someone 2 counties away from me. It didn't matter. I was absolutely, completely overcome with panic. I remember one time specifically, I was so overcome with anxiety that the W came up and it was actually a storm and it was actually in our area, and I gathered the essentials. Now I remembered from the video you need bottled water and some food. Well, being a kid, I grabbed what seemed essential. I grabbed a couple bottles of pop and some Little Debbie snack cakes. And I sat by the cellar door in anticipation of when I would have to retreat underground because of when the storm was going to come. And of course it didn't. So a big takeaway from this story is that yes, Jesus is able to control the natural world using only the sound of his voice. This story is about a real storm. And a big reason I think it's contained in the Gospels is, first of all, Jesus is showing that he has the same strength that is claimed by the competing gods in the Greek and Roman culture. There were gods who controlled the wind and the seas, and Jesus, in the midst of that culture, is saying, "I am the one who is overseeing the wind and the seas." But secondly, if you think about it this way, Jesus controlling the wind and the waves with just the sound of his voice sort of is a throwback to the Jewish creation story in Genesis, because how did God create all of those things? Just with the sound of his voice. So that is the big primary takeaway, but what happens in our lives is we tend to use this story as a metaphor for the storms of life, and that's how it finds a lot of value for us, and that's how we're going to be using it today. So I have 5 things for us to learn about that today. 5 things in 15 minutes? Maybe. We're going to find out. So I want to read something, because the first thing we can learn is that storms can come into our lives rapidly and powerfully. I want to read from the book here on page 13, Sarah Young. She shares this. The Sea of Galilee is nearly 700 feet below sea level, and it's surrounded by high mountains that rise thousands of feet into the air. When strong winds swept into this deep valley, they often gave rise to sudden, violent storms. And this was one such storm, and it completely unnerved these disciples. If you've heard a sermon on this story, you maybe have heard the idea of this lake sitting so low and the mountains around being so high that when the wind swept through, sometimes they would absolutely take off, and it would be a really dreadful, scary situation because of the lay of the land in that area. I think it's a reminder to us that storms can come at us quickly and powerfully, the storms of life. And it's easier to weather a storm when we see it coming, when we can sort of feel it coming, we can see it in the distance. We have time to prepare ourselves. We have time to anchor our hearts and our souls and our minds before the storm hits. But sometimes there are storms of life that do not allow us that kind of preparation. Sometimes storms just come, and they come quickly and they come powerfully, and they can really rock the boat of our lives. So that's the first thing. Here's the second. Even people who have a lot of experience with the storms of life can still be affected by fear. I want to read one last line from what Sarah Young had to share from that paragraph. These disciples were completely unnerved, even though some of them were very seasoned fishermen. Think about that for a second. This boat includes several people who are seasoned, experienced fishermen. People who are probably in their late teens to early 20s who have been fishing on this lake for years. There is no way that this is the first kind of storm of this type that they have ever experienced. Makes us tempted to look at them and go, they should have known better. They should have reacted differently. But I want to say that even if you have been there and done that in the Christian life for years or maybe even decades, I think you know it to be true just as well as I do, that there are still some storms in your life that creep in and can still rattle you because of how quickly and how powerfully they come in. I would put it this way, there is no amount of life experience that will ever make you or me immune to the effects of the storms of life. Even these experienced fishermen are rattled by the storm that they're facing. So, 2 down. Here's the third one. We learned that there is no storm that can challenge Jesus. Because during this story, the storm comes, the wind, the waves, the rain, right? And where is Jesus in all of this? He is asleep. Jesus is sleeping. Some people can sleep through anything. And maybe you know some people like this, right? I'm the kind of person, I struggle falling asleep. More often than not, I have trouble actually getting to sleep. However, once I'm asleep, I am pretty much down. There is not much that can wake me up and get me out of the bed. So this picture of Jesus sleeping, though, this is not for us to understand like, wow, Jesus really was able to maintain that deep REM cycle. No, this picture is completely different. It is a picture of his absolute trust in God. He was able to maintain a sense of peace and even rest in the middle of the mess that was surrounding him. So, that's the third one. Jesus cannot be challenged by any storm of life. So, only 2 left. Here's the fourth one. Jesus cares when a storm threatens your peace and your stability. So we're told that Jesus is sleeping, but then we're told what the response of the disciples were. Again, some of them seasoned fishermen, well acquainted with life on the boat, but all these disciples say with one voice in the text in Matthew's account, "Lord, save us! We're going to drown!" And actually, like in Mark's account, which is in Mark's chapter 4, it's a little more raw, which I kind of like that, because they say in that account, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" And one of the things I love about that account is that Jesus answers the question by what he does. By calming the storm, he answers the question, don't you care if we drown? And the answer is yes, he absolutely does care. Now, there might be some people who would argue, yeah, but if he really cares, why doesn't he stop all the storms before they even get started? I mean, valid question, right? If he really cares, why let us go through storms at all? I would answer it by saying this. First of all, I just don't think life works that way. I don't think life works in such a way that we ever get to be completely storm-free. I would also say this. If you look at how God relates to and with his people all the way through Scripture, you will see that the idea of a storm-free life is never there. I mean, just flip through the account of God's people in the Old Testament. They were never given a storm-free existence. Think about the Gospels. Jesus and his disciples, never storm-free. Think about the book of Acts. Think about the accounts of the early church. We are never promised a storm-free existence, period. But the invitation is into a relationship with God in the midst of the storm. Because in the middle of the storm, these two promises are real and they're true. The first one is that Jesus does care. Teacher, don't you care if we drown? And Jesus responds, because yes, he does care. But then the second promise is this: there is no storm that will last forever. And boy, if there is ever a message we need to hear during these times of COVID-19 and the mounting numbers and the news stories that we're reading. I was just playing with a website today that kind of projects the numbers for the nation and then the numbers for individual states. And sometimes those numbers can be scary. Sometimes the dates can be scary as far as how far this thing might stretch. But the promise is that it will not last forever. There is no storm that lasts forever. All right, 4 down. Here's the last one. Every storm is an opportunity to grow. Now, I refuse to get bogged down in how God did or did not, quote unquote, cause this storm to happen. To me, that is a discussion that just gets us bogged down with more and more questions, and we spiral. I am much more interested in asking, how did Jesus use this storm as it was happening? And I would say that he used the storm as an opportunity for growth, as a teaching moment for his disciples. In Matthew's account, Jesus responds to the disciples' plea for salvation, Lord, save us, by speaking first to them and then by calming the storm second. And it's actually reversed in Mark, but I find Matthew's to be interesting for our time, for our situation, for what I'm talking about today. That Jesus, when he's awoken by his disciples and they speak to him about their need for salvation, he speaks to them first, saying, oh, you have little faith, why are you afraid? And then he calms the storm. Think of that moment. With the winds still howling, with the rain still pouring, with the waves still crashing over the boat, Jesus asked that question, you of little faith, why are you still afraid? I wonder, could they even hear him above the wind, right? And he still asked the question while the storm is still happening. What if you were there in the middle of that moment? And you were in the disciples' shoes, right? What would you have been tempted to say if Jesus said, oh, you have little faith, why are you so afraid? I know that I probably would have, especially considering at this point in the Gospels, the disciples are still figuring out who this guy is. They don't know the fullness of who Jesus is yet. So if he says to me, why are you so afraid? I would be tempted to be like, dude, look around, right? How are you not afraid? This boat is way too small for all of these people, and I feel like with every wave that hits us, it's creaking more and more. How are you not afraid? But I think that Jesus, in his usual brilliant style, helps us answer that question within the question itself. His question is, why are you so afraid? And I think he helps us answer the question in the first part of the question, oh, you of little faith. Why are you so afraid? I would put it this way: the level of fear in our response to the storms of life is related to the level of faith in our hearts. The level of our fear is related to the level of our faith. Now, please don't hear me say that you can have so much faith that fear will never enter in. We'll never be immune to the storms of life and the fear that they can bring. So we should never feel guilty when those fears creep in during the storms. But I believe that as we grow in our faith, our fear in the storms will continue to decrease. And if we read it in this way, then the calming of that storm is an invitation to grow in faith. And that's exactly what happens if you read the passage. Because Jesus says, "Oh, you have little faith. Why are you still afraid?" Then he calms the storm. And then what happens immediately afterwards? In the calm after the storm, the disciples are asking each other and asking themselves, what kind of man is this? And the only way you answer those questions is if you go into a further or deeper investigation into who Jesus is and what he's all about. So essentially, as the storm subsides, Jesus is beckoning them to come closer to him. I want to finish by reading just a little bit more from Sarah Young's thoughts on this question that Jesus asks about fear and faith. She says this: "When I am feeling anxious or fearful, it's helpful to remember Jesus' soothing yet potent words, 'Peace, be still,' which is what he speaks in Mark's account of this story. Peace, be still. Because he is all-powerful and all-knowing. Jesus is fully capable of helping me and helping you. He is always with us, eager to help us with our fears. His words encourage us to be still in his presence, remembering who he is. Jesus' peace can soothe our troubled hearts." So, I hope those words bring you comfort today. I hope that they draw you closer to Jesus, especially if you find yourself in the middle of a storm at this point in life. So that is all today that I have for you. So thanks for joining me. Again, don't forget to send us your Easter greetings, and I will see you next week at 2 o'clock. Thanks for joining us.